All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Mazel tov. Today is Wednesday, so Wednesday night church service, and it's going to be a bit of a hodgepodge philosophical meandering, I think.
It's fine by me.
Who were we listening to? I suck with names. I can't ever remember.
Something green. Hold on, I'm sure it's in my history here.
What was the podcast? You said it was one of the
Modern
ones that's
Wisdom. Yeah,
Modern Wisdom. Yeah, you said it was one of the
Chris
ones that was your
Williams and
standards, like never miss an episode, basically.
pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was a physicist. Yes,
Yes.
he's a string theorist. You said
Brian Green.
Brian Green,
Green Greene. Yeah,
and
I'm gonna get his book too.
he had a lot of very interesting and insightful things to say. Um, and he was, clearly by his own admission, he is not a believer. He is an atheist, but he sees, much like where we started with Sapolsky, he sees where other people can believe, and he admits that there are gaps that I can't explain what this. I think I know what this is. I think I know what that is, but there are gaps here, and for some people, the most logical and or comforting explanation is something theological. So I really appreciated his take on things, and it also kind of sparked some things that I've been thinking and been wanting to talk about that we'll get into. Um, and then I do have a few things, interesting things from Prager, uh, continuing on in Genesis a little bit before we get to the next big thing, which is the flood. I do have some interesting little nuggets from there that made me go, and you might find interesting as well. Um, but one of the things that jumped out at me that the good Professor Green was saying, uh, and I'm going to put it in my words because this is something I've thought for a while, that one of the arguments or evidences that are used by intelligent design or creationist or literalist or whatever people are the odds.
Hmm.
The you can, to some degree of confidence, figure up the mathematical odds that uh, uh, um, an evolutionary branch will occur. In fact, this was, I believe it was Weinstein, who was one of the early guys who got canceled, talking about the origins of the right, because he was talking about these are all the things that have to happen for this to happen naturally, and then jump to a human. So you there's math there. That's math. So you can lay that out. But as Green pointed out, well, it may just be that we're the one. I mean, we haven't examined all of space, but we've been examining a good chunk of it, and everywhere we look, we have yet to find, to my knowledge, they have found some they think might be able to produce life because they're in that sweet spot. But all of the planets that we have examined with our radio telescopes and our telescopes in the past several decades, we're not finding anything that supports life. So it may just be that, yeah, we won the lottery. I mean, that the lottery odds are ridiculous, but someone does win it eventually,
Well,
right?
we'll see what happens with the Webb telescope because the first thing
Yeah.
they're doing is not looking further because the thing can. The first thing they're
Yes,
doing is looking deeper at the things we could see already.
exactly. And so uh it is possible that there are so many stars and planets out there that it isn't infinite. That's something I appreciated that he said, well, space is infinite, but the stuff in it isn't necessarily infinite. Um, and then you have to go down the rabbit hole of multiverse. But anyway, um,
Which
and,
is
and
an
so,
interesting thing, and I think that's something we put a pin in for later because
yeah,
also from a conversation I listened to with Neil deGrasse Tyson about the multiverse, and again, it's all theoretical. Well, even Green says in his Friedman interview, it's all hypothetical. It's not even
Mhm.
theoretical.
Yeah,
It hasn't even got to the rigor of
that's an important
theoretical.
distinction I was going to get to
And
eventually.
yeah, and when the guy himself who's part of it says that it's not there and he wishes it was called differently, then I think we should respect that wish. And it confuses the public,
Hmm.
because then the hardcore religious, the new earther types would say, well, string theory is a theory and there's no proof at all, and so is evolutionary theory, and so is gravitational theory, and
Hmm.
blah 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 blah. And no, that's not how theories work.
Yes, the Newton's laws were the law, and then some new stuff got discovered, and
Then Einstein
that's
came along.
and
Yeah.
that's why Einstein came along. That's why it was the theory of relativity, because it was proven mathematically, but it was understood that there are some other things here that we don't understand. And then quantum came along, and Einstein really did not like quantum theory. He had a hard time accepting it because to him it upended this beautifully ordered universe, is how he looked at the universe.
But
And so he did not like it.
then string theory came along, and it's actually aptly named, even though that's not why the name exists. But it actually, in all of these hypotheticals, helped to connect gravitational relativity and quantum together.
No, stay off the rabbit trail. Okay, no, back to what I was saying.
Well,
Um,
but relativity we know exists because Mercury wouldn't exist, black holes wouldn't exist. Those kind of things that we actually have evidence of now wouldn't exist without relativity.
yeah, I was trying to find there was a really good documentary on Einstein and on the theory of relativity, what it was, how it came about, but more importantly, how it was proven true through both math and observable phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And the short answer is some people got some really fancy telescopes and looked directly at a solar eclipse, and they were able to see that light bent around the sun, which is what Einstein said it should do if his theory was correct. Um, so yes, it is a theory, but these elements were mathematically shown and then observably proven.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, well, let's go down that rabbit hole now. I do think the difference between theory and hypothesis is important because, and he touched on this uh, in the in that interview, that I appreciate where he's coming from, but I think the problem is the conflict between the science and the theology, the philosophy, and where it gets real messy is that from all of the scientists I have seen, heard, or read, he Green is in the minority, and this is where the conflict from. This is why I think Berlinski was so uh, hostile in his writing and so scathing, because I think this is what he was addressing, is that you have a lot of scientists who want to step outside their field to declare that something is true when what they're basing it on is often not just a hypothesis, but a number of hypotheses smushed together with some theories, piled on with some facts to make it, look good and sound like they know what they're talking about, and then declaring that, and so this is so. Well, no, hold on a second. This might be so. You have just strung together a cosmology that you think is rational, that you think makes the most sense to you, but you're building a house of cards there, and a house of cards can be very stable and very uh, magnificent, and I certainly can't do it. I'm impressed by people who can do that, but it's still a house of cards, and when I sneeze, it's going to fall down.
Well, and this is where the leaps happen. So hypothesis is usually, if it's done right, and it's not just a guess. Hypotheses aren't guess. They're
Right.
they're already established from observation. Uh, a good hypothesis is this looks like it could be should be true. It needs to be tested, and we need to find a way to test it if we don't have a way to test it, which is where string theory is. Where relativity passed from hypothesis to theory is that thing you just talked about. They said well, we can't test it on Earth because everything on Earth is governed already by Newton's gravitational laws. So we already nothing's moving fast enough here for any of this to matter. Everything beyond it has to move faster for it to be for us to even get into the realm of relativity. But light moves faster. How can we test this? And people thought about it for probably a long time and said, well, if we looked at an eclipse, if it's right, it'll bend. If it's not, it'll go straight through or do something else. And then we got to go back to square one. And that was the test to the hypothesis. So it wasn't just that they decided to look at something and saw this cool curve. It was, we think there will be a curve if an eclipse happens and we happen to be looking at it. That's the test. And then, there were probably more tests than that before they decided to make the jump to actual theory.
The key distinction there, though, is that the relativity hypothesis had been around for a while. That
Oh yeah, Einstein was in a race.
people had been
Yeah.
thinking about this for a while, and there were others that were working on to get there. Um, it's been a while since I've studied this stuff, but if I remember correctly, there was something like a 20-year gap between when he published his paper on specific relativity and when he was able to publish his paper and prove general relativity. There was something like a 20-year gap, and there were other people working on it there. But the people had been working on it enough, and there was enough of a foundation of physics there that it was on the cusp of being proven, that people knew basically what it would take to prove it. It was just a
All it
matter of
would take was
figuring out
Matt
how to do
Damon.
it.
That's it.
Exactly. Wait, no.
Okay,
Um,
got to pause for a second.
all right. So where was I? Oh,
Sorry
so
for that hiccup there. Family came home and didn't want them on camera, especially in case they're in their underwear like previous episodes.
children.
But I
Okay.
also took the opportunity to get some of our sponsor, Oikos Triple Zero.
Yes. Hurry up and sponsor us. It's delicious. You were right.
All right, back to where
All
we
right.
were.
So uh, the problem with the very vocal atheistic zealously atheistic scientists that annoy me and cause people like Berlinski to write scathing books that you don't like is that they're taking things that are very interesting to be sure, but as Green put it, I like the way that he put it, that look, some of these things, especially when he was talking about like the that you can get yourself into an existential crisis, and that there he mentioned some physicist who had committed suicide going down these dark holes of basically some of the stuff he was talking about, to Cliff Notes version, some of the stuff he was talking about could lead you to a point of nihilism and hopelessness. Um, but as he put it, look, right now, these things are basically just thought exercises to kind of stretch your brain and say, what if, to your point, so that we don't necessarily prove this thing, but it can help us prove things along the way, prove things we haven't proven yet, that we're stretching our brains so far that it helps us prove these things that are closer. But what the zealously atheistic people do is they take these very interesting things, but things that are very tenuous, things that are very philosophical and are frankly just barely scientific at this point. At some point, they might not be. At some point, they may be much more solid. But at this point, they're much more philosophical than scientific. But in in their zeal to declare themselves, their cosmology right, they are declaring that because of this, therefore, God is dead, The Big Bang atheistic cosmology is the only rational, correct cosmology, and that simply isn't so.
Well, I would kind of take a step back from that. It's really it has to be amazingly difficult to not believe in God, but to believe in any written version of the God story, whether that's Christianity, Judaism, or whatever, because it's so. We talk about how sophisticated the writing is, but when it comes to actual observation of nature, it's very crude. And when we went through the first episode, I was going through these are the things that aren't accounted for, and these are the things that were natural anyways, and this kind of just goes along with a natural explanation of it going along. And I do think there are things that need to be accounted for. What happens if there is advancement in string theory? Well, now God created the universe. Well, no, we have something before the universe now. And this is my problem with the Berlinski book, is because they just keep going back where it was, oh, God created the world, and then we realize we're in a galaxy. Well, God created the solar system. Then we realize we're in, the Milky Way. God created that. And then we just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and discovering more. And the religious side just keeps going further and further and further back.
Well, I think that's where Aquinas comes in, and that's why he talked about him a fair bit, especially early on. And to his credit, Berlinski pointed out, because again, this is someone who is a secular Jew. He is not a theologian himself, but he appreciates the beauty of a good argument, of a well-crafted argument. And he pointed out when he talked about Aquinas, he said something to the effect, look, it's not foolproof. There are flaws and there are holes in it, but you have someone who was writing, what was it, like 900 or 1000 AD, somewhere in that area, well before these astronomical advances in science. And well before that, he came up with the idea that cause and effect, eventually you will get to a first effect, and so there must be a cause, so there must be a creator. In a nutshell, read it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's very poetic in its language, as well as brilliant. It will help stretch your brain for sure. It's one of those books that we talk about. You should be reading something fictional, something non-fictional. That's one that should be on your list of non-fiction
I was
reads
going to
because
say
it
a
will stretch
fiction.
your brain. It's a philosophical treatise.
Yeah.
So whether you find it convincing theologically isn't the point. The point is it is a very well written philosophical treatise, in the same way that Aristotle should be on your list, even though he gets scientific. And crap, which one is it? Where he talks about the humors. He goes into great detail about the humors. Uh, so when it comes to biology and science, anyway, the point being that these aren't new arguments, and it's not that no one has ever thought these things before. That was Berlinski's point, is look, you got a monk here over 1,000 years ago who has already anticipated this argument well before we knew any of the things about astronomy and physics that we know now. And he crafted a very well put together argument that can be convincing to some people, that is convincing to some
And
people.
see, here's where I would turn it around. And this is why I didn't like the Berlinski argument. You only liked it because you're on the side he was arguing for. Because you're saying about scientists precisely what religious people have been doing since these religions existed. When you ask the scientist what came before the universe, what came before the Big Bang, their answer is, we're working on that. We think we have these ideas. We're
Well, no,
working on
that
that. When
that's
you ask a religious person, they said God made everything and don't even look.
see, but you're putting too nice a shine on your argument, because They don't all say that. That's the problem. That's what I was talking about. Cosmologically, they will say, we're working on that, but it certainly wasn't any God. Because that's what a Dawkins would say. He would say, I don't know, but it
Well,
certainly wasn't God.
I would amend your statement, putting words in his mouth. He would say it's not your God. It's not the biblical
No,
God.
he rejects any sort of because he finds the idea of intelligent design stupid. And that there was a I meant to go looking for this and I forgot about it. There was an interesting documentary done by Ben Stein, who I think is also a secular Jew. I don't think he's Orthodox. Um, but he's got a scientific mind, and so he found it, and he's pretty irreverent. Uh, he found the idea of intelligent design interesting, and he found the reaction to it amongst the academic community fascistic, which it was. And so he did a documentary called No Intelligence Allowed. And he talked to some proponents of intelligent design, some of whom are not religious. They are uh they're probably more in the camp of like Ben Franklin of I think there's probably something out there, but I don't know what it is. But all of the scientific research I have done points to an order. And Green talked about this. He doesn't find it convincing, but he recognizes how it is possible to look at all the laws of nature that we know about and see order there, and,
Mhm.
and thus see a designer there because it looks so neatly put together.
Yeah, but he said it in the respect of the fact that we have an observer bias. We're looking back at the design.
Mm-hmm.
We're knowing probabilities. Yeah, we might be the only one, but at the same time, it doesn't mean something put it together. The
So
explosion happened, and this one little blip on the map happened to have that probability. Now, Pentagon says there's aliens. We're still
Man,
we're,
isn't it interesting how fast that story came and went? The Pentagon basically admitted, yes, aliens exist. We have seen them. We have documented them. The only thing they didn't admit is we have been in contact with them, which is what the real conspiracy theorists say. And there was so much other crap going on that it barely made a blip in the news.
well, there. Dr. Jonathan Shelder, he's a psychoanalyst. He said he got it from somewhere, but I can't remember what the name he quoted. But he talks about the three basically hard truth moments that humanity has had. And when he says humanity, we will say Christian humanity because it would be because geographically this is the Western world.
Okay.
And the first one was Copernicus. We are not the center of the universe. When Earth wasn't the center of the universe, humans in general had a problem with that. And it wasn't just religious. It was the fact that we thought we were special. Observer bias. We're better than animals. We're better than this. We till the earth. We are the masters of the environment around us. And all of a sudden, this idea that we were the center of the universe and the sun came around us and the stars maneuvered around us was blown up. That was hard to swallow. The second one was Darwin. Oh my gosh, we actually are animals too. That was hard to swallow for people. And then the third one was Freud, where the whole idea of pure free will. Now we could still have an
Okay.
idea of what is free will is there, but the fact that all of these underlying factors that come from birth and prenatal environment are all of a sudden influencing our adult thoughts in ways that we don't even know exist, well then that shattered the original thought of free will. Again, we can go from there on what is free will, but we at least everybody at least understands that we are subject to our past and our genetics to some degree and our brain development to some degree. So those three moments in scientific history were earth shattering to humans in general, but mostly Christian humans because it was in the Western world. And it I can see that from a human standpoint. And when you look at the document of the Bible being human centric, well, it was shattering to the doctrine as well, because it is very human centric. We are the masters of the earth and the world around us. We are the tillers of the soil. Noah was responsible, as we're going to get to, for making sure the animals went on and picking and choosing, and he was why things are the way they are now from the animal kingdom standpoint. So it was when you look at the broad universe that we're talking about, what's going to be the next advancement? Some people would say it was the Big Bang, the thought of the Big Bang, but we're still working on that.
Mhm. So you circled me back to where we started,
Good, because we
because
thought we went down the rabbit hole. So
yeah, well, no, this is all stuff that I meant to get to. It was just not necessarily in the order I meant to. But the idea of probabilities, that so this is where I would, because I kind of started off on the, you know, Christians, creationists who use the probabilities is, well, hold on. So this is kind of an analogy I use is you have to be careful saying, well, this is highly improbable because all right, if we're playing cards and I need the ace of spades to win, and I draw the ace of spades. Oh my gosh, what are the odds of that? Well, the odds were 1 in 52, but now they're 1 in 1 because I drew it. It's happened. So odds are something
well, how many
that,
cards did you have in your hand?
yeah, well, you
How
know
many
what I mean.
people were playing, and how how
Yeah,
many aces did you have, and how many aces did everybody else have? The probability wasn't 1 in 52. The probability was
1 in whatever.
however many aces
The
were left in the deck versus how many cards were in the deck.
the point is that's mostly irrelevant after the fact because it's there, it's on the table, it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. However,
We're just the
if
rider
you're
on the elephant, my friend.
if you're looking at options, then the probability does matter.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, wait a second. Did you really draw that or did you rig the deck? Because X, Y, and Z reasons, these are the odds that would have happened. I saw you a couple of hands ago throw a card out from the bottom of the deck, whatever it may be. So where the odds, the improbability of random occurrence leading to us sitting here having this conversation, uh, where the odds of that do matter is when you're trying to pick between options. And that's why I harp on the idea that no, it's not um, the Bible or theology versus science, it's theology versus scientists. Because you have a bunch of scientists who are declaring things to be concrete truth that are not concrete truth. They are an option. And to a lot of people, that option makes more sense. It is more rational because of X, Y, and Z reasons. But to me, I can look at it and say, well, I see some big problems there. I see some big gaps there. I see some improbabilities there that I have trouble reconciling.
Well, so you've created a nice little us versus them thing, but let me smooth it, or let me whittle it down just a little bit. You have two camps where they say this is the answer. You have the zealot scientists, and you have every Christian. Every Christian that believes in God believes in the creation story in some form or another.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the zealot scientists believe their side, their answer, and then the greens out there that don't believe are in another camp. There's you created a binary, scientists versus theologians.
Well, because
Where
that's what we're talking about here.
the
We're
only one that but the only side of that has one concrete answer is the theologians. The scientists, even amongst themselves, the ones that think they have the answer will argue with another one that thinks they have another answer.
well, no, that is That's not true because the theologians argue with each other all the time as well. They that
But the ultimate answer is the same. God.
the ultimate answer, the other side of this is the same too. It's anything but God.
No, it's we don't believe in God, but I believe this one. I believe we'll say the string theorists or the
Yeah, so
yeah the
anything but God. If you boil it down, if you make it reductive, and there's not anything inherently wrong with being reductive, it just depends on how you use it. But if you make it reductive, then yes, the, as a big ball on this side, people who believe in some degree, in some way in the Bible, believe that somehow God made it all happen. And they'll argue with each other about how that happened. On the other side, you have people that say, we don't know, we're investigating, but it's anything but God. And then in the middle, you
well,
have these poor little ID guys who are saying, I don't know, it looks like some kind of designer to me, and everybody hates them.
have you ever thought of the environment though? Uh, Dawkins is a good example because he reacts to the reaction very vehemently. You give him an inch, you give him a mile. Everybody knows that about human nature. And the greens of the world are very rare because it's very hard in the scientific community. And trust me, I've talked to many religious people as a non believer to say it could be God, but I don't think so because of this. And as soon as you give that, it could be, here it comes. Oh, so you do believe deep down inside, you know it to be true. And that's
Yeah, that's
evidence
annoying.
in and of itself. That's what you get all day, every day.
Well, I can sympathize with why they do that because if you are convinced, then you are talking about something important here. You're talking about your immortal soul and where you will spend eternity in the afterlife. That's a big effing deal. So you can understand where the zealotry comes from, but that's a reason, not an excuse.
Well, and a lot of times the fire back is I don't believe in your whole heaven and hell, and I should believe just because of my immortal soul. So I'm going to keep looking over here. So leave me the fuck alone. And then it becomes a heated argument.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, I
Not,
will also
I will admit though there are scientists that are religiously married to their conclusions.
was it Green who said something that sent us off on a rant talking about that about how the yes, because he talked about the new atheist movement and where he very quickly said, guys, you're on the wrong track here because they were acting like religious people. And that's the whole kind of in general, the big umbrella term of woke. That's what that is. They're not acting like rational people. They're acting like members of a cult. And and that's also where I sympathize with the theological side of things is because since the 1950s, it has been a steady march against Christianity in the United States, which was ostensibly founded on the
By the way,
principles of the Judeo-Christian Bible.
this is the new atheist movement. Atheism plus. Do they realize they added a cross to
Um,
atheism?
um, okay.
It's also the woke version of atheism, which is a religion in of itself. But no, the new atheists are right in line with your new earthers. They're
Oh, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the name is right. They're mirror images of each other. Just
Hmm.
and you know what? Let's let them fight it out. Let's just put them in a ring, let them fight it out, and then we'll kill the winner.
No, that would be mean.
Oh,
We'll we'll banish them to an island that has an asteroid hurtling towards it. I think that was a Futurama episode. Okay, where was I? Um, so on this note, just speaking personally, this is how I kind of came to where I'm at now is so, for everyone else who doesn't know, I started off in the hard sciences and then I decided I don't like that as much as I like that. I don't want that to be the focus of my study. And then I ended up in history, which was worthless, but what are you going to do? And so for a while, I was also kind of bouncing between different churches because nothing, I was like, this doesn't, nothing seemed right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. So I was kind of waffling and drifting. And then I found a book called, and throw out your hateful comments in the comment section. That's fine. The book does have some problems, but it's called More Than Just a Carpenter. It's a very small book. And basically the focus of this guy's book was the improbability of Jesus. Okay, because and he kind of kept it simple of here are a few very concrete prophecies from the Old Testament, and he went through the age of the documents, like how old some of the Old Testament texts we have are, like what we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the historical facts of Jesus, leaving out the miracles, leaving out the theology, just that this was a person who existed, who was a teacher, who had a following. And if you look at just those few core prophecies, the odds that someone would come along and fulfill those things are astronomical. And so that kind of led me to the conclusion of, well, I have a hard time accepting at that time, I have a hard time accepting Genesis and some of the Old Testament, but this makes perfect sense to me, especially as a historian, knowing what we know about the ancient world and being able to have confidence in this historical fact. Therefore, I can accept the rest of the book. And then that, was the beginning of a long trail that kind of led me here. Uh, so the idea of improbabilities and probabilities, it is not an answer. It is not the argument. It can be a point of evidence one way or another if you let it uh, uh, solidify a larger point. Because it's like I told my children, I tell people, no, you can't use Wikipedia as a source, but you could use it as a starting point. Go look down at the references and start checking things out to see if everything adds up. But it is not a source in and of itself, if that makes sense.
Oh, I agree with the Wikipedia comment. I'm so are you comparing Wikipedia to the book you read?
It, the idea of probability and improbability in general is not the argument. If you are basing your faith or lack thereof on that, I think you need to do some deeper thinking.
Hmm.
That is simply uh, a argument. That is simply a piece of evidence, because what you're dealing with is a lot of unknown. So what makes sense to you? Okay, so you take like for me, it was the prophecies of Jesus, the man, and his life, some very specific things, like where he would be born, what tribe he would be born into, stuff like that, when and how he would die. Some. It's been a while since I read the book, but I want to say he had like 10 prophecies, like just core about the guy's life kind of thing. Uh, might be sacrilegious to call Jesus the guy, but it's too late. I've gone too far. Um, and so that was basically the core of his argument. And that made sense to me. That kind of solidified thing because it worked on my mind because I was already kind of thinking about the New Testament in historical terms, not necessarily theological terms. And so that kind of fit into the things I was already thinking about, and then it led to some other steps. Is my main point is that was that was the start of a number of steps and study and thinking that led me to here and what I think now and what I've been talking about these, past episodes that we've been doing this.
Yeah, the problem from our seat is we're 2,000 years later looking back.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads the skeptic to say, well, how much of the writing was accurate? How much of the, even the scrolls, those things could be not kosher in some ways. There's too much left to the air, but let's go for the sake of argument that everything was written in the order it was supposed to be and the accounts were accurate. Because remember, accounts are going to be biased too. Accounts of events are going to be biased by the people who are expecting the prophecies to happen. But still, yeah, you're talking probabilities. You take a genius of that day and age who was born in the right place, the right time. You can self-fulfill prophecy all the way to success. If you just happen to be, how many people failed in the prior wake to that?
Well, you could, but do you can I get us in trouble? I don't know
Sure,
how
why
many
not?
people I don't know how many people watch us, but sorry if any of you are Mormons. You could do that, and yet Joseph Smith didn't. Because in the Book of Mormon, it one of the things it purports to be are new prophecies of Jesus. It says he will be born in Jerusalem. That's not even remotely true. Unless you're saying the whole of the rest of the Bible is wrong, which would be problematic since you claim that this is just another testament of the life of Jesus.
But again, that's the successor bias. You're talking about someone who failed.
No, I'm just saying that yes, it could be done, but we have a prime example of someone who tried and
Yeah.
failed spectacularly. To that point, though, yes, you can't be certain. However, and I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name of an actual
Let me let me
legit Bible
let
scholar who teaches in Israel somewhere. This is the way he put it. That the reason the Dead Sea Scrolls were so important both historically and theologically is because you had a collection of scrolls that were written 2 to 300 BC, if I remember correctly, and preserved and untouched until the 50s or 60s, I think it was. And so you could use that to compare with other texts you had to say, does this line up? And the way he put it is, yes, there are differences between the different texts we have, but those differences are akin to using also instead of to, is the way he put it. There are no substantive differences between the texts. And you're talking about texts that were written over vast both in distance and time. So whether you believe it was divinely inspired or not, we can have a high degree of confidence that the words that are written are the words that were supposed to have been written. That whether these were just, you know, stories made up and handed down amongst the tribes of Israel or divinely inspired, you can have a relatively high degree of confidence that at the least these were the original words that were spoken or written.
Well, let me bring it back to modern times to kind of analogize this. There's this book here. It's the last one.
Revelations.
The end of time. Yeah, Revelation.
Oh,
And
that's a
there
doozy.
there are a lot of groups right now that are seeing the things that have happened since 2020 and are putting, oh, that one matches, that one matches, that one matches. Yeah, we're about to die here. The end of the world is coming. That one matches. You know how many times in history that's happened?
I think we talked about
The
this a little bit
Crusades,
too.
they were
Yeah.
going, oh, oh, and then there was a
I
plague, and
mean,
then there was this, and then there,
my
and
gosh, the we still do not know how many people, and we're just 75 years removed from it. We still don't know how many people died in World War II because so many people died, and so often amongst the people who were dying were the government officials who would have been responsible for figuring out how many people died. So you don't think that looked like the end of the world?
But now go back to 2000 years ago. Every time some prodigy come along, there was somebody going, "Oop, that looks right. Oh, no, they failed. Damn it." And then the next one come along. Oh, yep. Oh, they failed on that one. Oh, never mind. How many failures before the success? And you would
Well,
say,
and
well, because he was the chosen one, and the other ones were just pretenders. But at the
you
same
know,
time, this is how the world, this is how human nature works. We
no,
look
that
for
that
that. We look for those
yeah.
signs. We look for those things.
If I recall correctly, that's where the Dead Sea Scrolls came from, is they were hidden away by basically a doomsday cult of like a splinter of Jewish people who thought that, these are the end times. And so they hid away their scrolls. Um that is certainly something that has to be kept in mind. So my point is from the historical evidence, you can have a good degree of confidence that the words you are reading, translation vagaries aside, the words you are reading were the words that were put down centuries, perhaps even millennia ago. Certainly more so than anything else in the ancient world, because there are so many copies over such a period of time that certainly more so than anything else in the ancient world. Now, whether you think that makes it divine or not is up to you. Obviously, you don't. Frankly, it doesn't impact me. I just find it historically interesting
Well,
that.
it's funny because we jumped straight to the New Testament here, but the New Testament is where I think it kind of jumped ship on its original uh,
Mhm.
efficacy
Yeah,
because,
you've kind of hinted at that
well,
the
because
last few times. Yeah.
all the way from the creation story up to the New Testament, it was a living document over time through the lives of these people. And as society evolved, the rules and regulations evolved with it.
No, that's a fair point, that you are following the people of Israel over centuries,
Mm-hmm.
over and not just centuries, but major changes in their society. Because you start off, you start off as the nomadic people of Abraham, then you move to, the favored, minority immigrants of Egypt. Then you become the enslaved people of Egypt. Then you are ruled by judges. And then you say, give us a king, and you are ruled by a monarchy. Then you are destroyed and spread amongst the conquering empires of the Near East. And all through this,
Well,
the
even
the
further
these
back,
stories are being
the
written.
Garden of Eden was going from the wild to civilization.
Mhm.
So even further back, but it's a living document that actually evolved with the people. Whereas the New Testament, everything stopped. And as society evolved, it doesn't take into account the Enlightenment. It doesn't take into account expansion across the world into other civilizations that were just as massive as the ones that we came from, such as the Asian continents and the it doesn't it,
Well,
it it doesn't take into account the cyber age. It doesn't take into account all of these things.
without
Otherwise, it would say, "Thou shalt not eat Oreos to excess." You know,
what about the white fudge ones? They're so good. Anyway, I digress. Those and the peach gummies, those are the two candies. Because like candy in general, especially once I started intermittent fasting, I can ignore most candy because it's just not worth it to me. If I'm gonna eat something sweet, I want it to be worth it because I haven't eaten all day. So I want like, a homemade cookie or brownie or pie or something like that. Except for the white fudge Oreos and the peach gummies. You know what I'm talking about?
I
God,
know what you're talking about. I'm not a big fan.
that's the only real like sugary candy that I like. As opposed to like chocolatey candy is the peach gummies.
I like salted caramel.
Salted caramel stuff is dangerous because that salt makes you crave more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
And
dangerous.
it'll pull
Okay,
off your crown if you're not careful.
so not answering that directly, but sticking with the text we have here, that is a point that I was going to make. So you've segued me to moving on, which is that yes, you can have confidence that what you are reading is what was originally written down or passed on orally. That doesn't mean your interpretation of it is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there's some interesting nuggets here. Like, for instance, so we talked about Cain and Abel, and then we kind of moved on. Because chapter 5 is a somewhat bizarre genealogy of Adam's descendants, where it gives the lives they lived, which are ludicrously long,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a bit of a head scratcher of what does this mean and why is it here? So it's a bit of a head scratcher. And uh Prager, uh very uh you know, boldly and unashamedly says, I don't know. Uh so this is how he puts it at the end of chapter 5. How are we to explain the length of time, the hundreds of years the individuals listed here lived? Here are the three most possible explanations. One, the ages at which these individuals died are literally true, and we just cannot explain them. Incidentally, that would that conceivably support the young earthers, that would living that long give you enough time to procreate enough that humanity could have come from these small numbers?
It'd be
Random
yeah,
random thought,
a
but
lot of
when
inbreeding, but
yes, but assuming that you were fertile for most of that life, like Methuselah lived 700, or Methuselah, Lamech. I mean, these guys live 500, 700, 900 years. Anyway, two, the numbers mean something other than or in addition to a literal number of years. This is common in the Torah. For example, the number 40 signifies a significant period of time and one in which God is involved. 40 days of the flood, 40 days of the Israelites, etc., etc. Three, astrophysicist and theologian Hugh Ross maintains the key to understanding these long ages is when God limited how long human beings could live. He did so immediately after the flood. God's preoccupation throughout the Torah is with goodness. That was the reason he destroyed the world. The world was engulfed in evil. Obviously, the longer people live, the more time they have to commit evil and to spread evil ideas. While God originally intended man to live many years, God's concern with the triumph of good over evil meant the years people could live had to be drastically reduced. So,
I would tend away from the last one because we have zero fossil evidence of anybody ever living that long.
if you're talking about that long ago, though, would you be able to tell how long they lived?
Uh, I can't remember how it's done with humans, but yeah, you
Okay.
can tell age unless they just aged at a
Hmm.
rate that was identical to like we talk about dog years, right?
Right, right.
Like when they're 200, they would look 40, something like that. Unless they aged at a rate like that, but I mean I
Well,
can't.
I know you can tell to a degree um with bones,
Mm-hmm.
based on the wear and tear of what happens. Like with females especially, you can tell because the pelvis shifts when they reach childbirthing age and that kind of thing. So I know you can tell to a degree. But I know that from that Nova show that I referenced, and now I've forgotten the name again. but I showed it last time or the time before. They talk about this, about how the degree to which DNA degrades, so that makes it harder and harder to find usable DNA to when they're looking at these various Homo groups,
Hmm.
and see, trying to trace back where they came from and then where they went, is why it takes so long, because you have to stick it in a supercomputer, and then the supercomputer has to think for a couple of months because it has a lot of gaps to fill in. Okay, anyway, but this leads into chapter 6, which is another bit of a head scratcher here. And this oh, actually no, before I go there, because this is going to get kind of mystical and mythical for a bit. And so something we kind of we didn't talk about, and then I went back and I was rereading chapter 4 with Cain and Abel. And this goes right in line with, me yelling at my side of, you know, your interpretation may not be correct. How many times have you seen uh, a story, like a mystical fantasy type story that involves the Mark of Cain?
Oh, plenty.
Like I've seen several different vampire shows where that's what the Mark of Cain is,
Hmm.
right? I don't remember who somebody made the first vampire Judas, and I don't remember who that was. Um, Drawing a blank on that. Anyway, um, but there are a number of different, you know, mythical interpretations that make the Mark of Cain, the first of some kind of monster. And Prager points out this was a mercy. This was a blessing. It wasn't a curse. The mark's not a curse. The mark was so that people would know that he was protected by God. And so Prager makes the point that we can, based on other things that are in the Torah, that we can presume that the killing of Abel was what we today would call a crime of passion,
Hmm.
because um, God gives mercy to Cain. He is not, and in other places, murder is punishable by death. That is the death penalty is prescribed in, Leviticus is, I think, where it gets into the details. But God grants him mercy twice. One, by sparing his life, and then two, by giving him this mark, because he's being cast out. So in days of yore, if you did not have clan and community, you were preyed upon. You were vulnerable.
Hmm.
And that's what Cain was saying, is that if you cast me out, people are going to kill me, because they're going to know that I'm clanless, I'm alone. And God says, "No, I put a mark upon you so that others will know you are under my protection." So how many times have you seen that story, and how many people have just presumed that the mark of Cain was because he killed Abel? No, that was a mercy. It was a blessing given by God. And yet it is kind of ingrained traditionally, not scripturally, but traditionally, that this was some kind of curse, but it's not. Kind of obviously, on the face of it, it's not.
Well, it makes for a better story for modern stories.
Does make for a better story for modern stories. Something else that makes for a better story for modern story are the Nephilim. This is chapter 6, and this is where it gets weird and interesting. Um, Another point where it gets weird and interesting. Okay, so chapter 6. Um, when men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, the divine beings saw how beautiful the daughters of men were, and took wives from among those that pleased them. So Prager says the word translated here as divine beings are the Hebrew words B'nai Ha Elohim, literally sons of the gods. What is the translation you're looking at say in
Wait, okay, so what was it?
chapter 6, verse 2.
Verse
He
2.
he has it translated as the divine beings. And I
That
think it
this says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they were
okay, so
beautiful.
sons of God, which is what Prager says is the literal translation of the Hebrew there. So he goes on, we do not know exactly what the Torah is referring to here. But you wouldn't know that if this is, me as an aside, you wouldn't know that if you look at the traditions that spawn from this chapter. We do know the Torah is adamant that God is the one true deity. The strange happenings described here are probably a polemic against the popular ancient belief that gods and human women could mate to produce semi-divine beings. It is essential to recall that the Torah had to be relevant to people living 3,000 years ago, and they understood parts of it better than we do today, just as we understand parts of the Torah better than people in the late Bronze Age did. So
Well,
he makes this point.
the footnote in here for that says some people have thought of the sons of God as were fallen angels, but sons of God were probably not angels because angels do not marry or reproduce. But some scholars believe this phrase refers to the descendants of Seth who intermarried with Cain's descendants, or they say Cain's evil descendants. This would have weakened the good influence of the faithful and increased moral depravity in the world, resulting in an explosion of evil.
To could be interesting story, but to Prager's point, and he makes this point a couple of times in this chapter, is that the the Torah, especially the Genesis story, is doing a couple of things, and one of the main things it's doing is to be a stark contrast to the other origin stories and myths of the Near East. So a lot of what may be happening here in Genesis that we, in quotes here, that we build traditions on and build assumptions on may be entirely inaccurate because it was something that was being written for those people at that time. Now, you can read your own message into it, and if it doesn't conflict with things that are said elsewhere, okay. But, to Prager's point, this may be something that is directly opposing something of the time, like a major belief or story of the time. For as an example, and something way down the road, uh, every plague in Exodus, except for the last one, is directly attacking a Egyptian deity. And he goes into more detail about it, but you have the Nile, you have frogs, you have the first one, or it's not even a plague, but the kind of first miracle of the snakes. Snakes were a major component. Snake uh anthropomorphized snakes were a major component in the pantheon of Egypt. And we did talk about that. I think I did mention that a little bit with the serpent, that so far as I know, that was a Christian tradition. And if somebody knows the actual scriptural components that turned the serpent into the devil, but in the original story, the serpent was a serpent. And one of Sarna's points is that uh, many of the Near Eastern traditions had serpent or serpentine creatures as deities. And that was probably
Lizard people.
exactly, exactly. You have to watch out for the lizard people. Israelites knew it 5,000 years ago. Um, but in order to, you know, have a contrast, an attack on the lizard people is to say, no, no, this is just a reptile, and God has power over it. This is not a deity. There's a lot of imagery of serpents. Have you gotten around to watching Ancient Apocalypse?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, there's some really cool megalithic Stone Age places that he goes there, and even way back then, way into prehistory. And when we say historians say prehistory, they mean pre-written history. So history starts with the written word. Everything before that is archaeology. And there's a lot of, even way back then, in sites that have been dated like 8 to 10,000 years old. You've got a lot of serpent iconography there. So whatever's happening here in chapter 6 may be that, but you get a lot of weird traditions that come from here because uh to your footnote, there are a lot of people who think these sons of God are fallen angels and therefore demons.
Hmm.
There are a lot of people who think this is where the beginning of the demonic influence in the corporeal world happens. And to them, this is evidence um, that the demonic can directly influence, directly interact with our world, the corporeal world, um, rather than just being um, a philosophical or ephemeral thing. Um, like some strains of theology are that the uh, the spiritual battle, the angels versus demons thing, is something that happens outside of our world and doesn't impact our worlds. And for those who believe that it does impact our world, this is one of the, perhaps the first point of evidence, is that here you have sons of God, fallen angels, corrupting man. Uh, and you can think that's what it might be, but as Prager goes to great lengths to point out, you don't have the evidence to conclude that because we don't know what's happening here. And then okay, so are you still there in chapter 6?
I am. I was looking up the references to the angels do not marry or reproduce. The Matthew one was pretty vague.
Yeah.
So there was two though. Mark 12:25. 12.
Well, according to Kevin Smith, verse 13, they don't have genitals, so there's that. Because verse 4 is when it mentions
uh,
the Nephilim.
12, 20.
And this is where he says directly that, I don't know, maybe they knew back then. So uh this is Prager's commentary on verse 4. We do not know what the Torah had in mind in this opaque verse. Jews thousands of years ago most likely understood this reference and the point the Torah wished to make better than we do. Other than being giants, see Numbers chapter 13, verse 33, we cannot even be sure who the Nephilim were. Were they the products of the union of the divine beings and the earthly women? Or were they the B'nai Elohim, the divine beings themselves?
Mm.
And he goes on about how convoluted and complicated and what this might be and who knows and whatnot. But again, this is, especially since it gives a specific name here, this has um this has spawned all sorts of traditions about what the Nephilim were. And Prager says very frankly that we have no frickin' idea. We have some assumptions, and there are some other references, but this is probably one of those instances where the point of this verse is more for the people who were reading it at the time and in the years preceding it rather than for us.
Now, which verse was the Nephilim?
Uh, verse 4 is when it uses the word Nephilim.
Is that where in my version it says giants?
Yes. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth, when the divine beings cohabitated with the daughters of men who bore them offspring. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. Um, and in Numbers, they're referred to as giants, and I believe later, where is it? Um, yeah, here we are. So this is the Bible scholar that Prager is quoting. Um, a generation later, Joshua eliminates all the giants from the land except from the Philistine cities, particularly the city of Gath. Joshua 11:21-22, and later still the most famous Philistine giant Goliath comes from Gath, 1 Samuel, and David defeats him. So it is translated differently elsewhere, and they're referred to as giants. So yeah, so that English translation may say giants instead of Nephilim, which would make a little more sense because tell you what they are. But the bigger point is, just because I can have a good degree of confidence that uh chapter 6 verse 4 was supposed to read this way doesn't mean I know what it means.
I mean, I'm thinking in real life, is this when we encounter Neanderthal, who were bigger and stronger and smarter than us, who would be the great warriors?
I think it's funny that they're smarter than us because that is, I mean, Encino Man, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the popular perception of what a
Well,
Neanderthal is.
back when Hollywood took the reins to make Encino Man, they kind of conflated uh, the mainstream ideal that we are from Neanderthal, or
Mm.
we were Homo sapien existed at the same time as Neanderthal, and then we interbred with them at some point in time, or certain parts of the world did.
Yeah, because wasn't the thought at one point that Homo sapien was an evolution of Neanderthal?
Yeah, yeah. I'm pretty sure that the scientific community had it figured out by the time Encino Man came out, but it made for a better, more simple
Right.
movie.
Because this cheese is old and moldy.
I was going to say El
Where's the
queso es
bathroom?
viejo y podrido.
You're right, man. She
You're
isn't
right.
worth it. Okay.
Oh, the 80s.
All right. That was kind of my tie-in to the verses here that we're going through. Um there are some this
Hold on.
chapter 6 in general is a bit of a head scratcher because there's some things in here that make you go, what? If you really think about it. Um because where is it? Verse 6, chapter 6, verse 6. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was saddened. Wait, the the omnipotent God who created the world regretted that he made man. That's a bit of a head scratcher, and that can lead you down a bit of a spiral. And his heart was saddened. Wait, the being of a pure order that created creation to follow certain rules and laws so that things would be structured, and gave commandments and decrees to man so that man could be structured and ordered and better. his heart was saddened. That's
It's funny. I was
interesting.
looking at timelines. I had to look up a few things. But if you view these stories as metaphor and as again a progression through our evolution as man, the interbreeding with Neanderthal here would not, if you just take the life of Noah, was supposed to have lived like 800 years or something like that,
Mm.
it would not match timeline wise. But if you take the whole story as a context where it's not the 6,000-year-old world, the timeline is about right for humans to start interbreeding with Neanderthal and then the flood. It's about 50,000 years, but in the course of hundreds of thousands of years being
Mhm.
compressed into just a few pages we've done.
So I may get into it in detail later, but I should point out since you brought that up, the genealogies listed in the Bible are not always complete. That is one of the numerous terrible fallacies of the young earth idea, is that you can't say, well, see, we added up the genealogies here. Okay, except well, you'll have a genealogy here in this book, and then the same genealogy. These are generally the genealogies of the lineage of Christ over here, and then again over here, and they're not all the same. So we know that it doesn't always list every generation. So you have no idea how many gaps are in there, how many unlisted forefathers are in that genealogy. No clue whatsoever. One of the many, many problems with that. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end it, and we can talk about man's wickedness next time.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
the
favorite
appropriate
subject.
shirt on there.
Hey, I'm only half wicked.
Exactly. Only
Wicked
half wicked.
awesome.
If you were wicked awesome, you would have given me more supersets.
Oh.
I had no curls whatsoever this week.
Well, that's because you're wanting to work out 6 days a week. All
All
right.
right.
So
Well,
tomorrow, Wheel of Time.
yeah. Speaking of order and uh, uh, you know, fighting the chaos. Tomorrow's Lord of Chaos.
Yes.
So I think we left off with getting back to Rand's storyline, didn't we?
Mm-hmm. Getting back to Jesus' storyline. Born at a certain place, fulfilled the prophecies, killed millions of
The
people.
You're a very bad person. Well, that derailed my train of thought. So we will see y'all tomorrow for some more Lord of Chaos, where we will have totally different but the same philosophical discussion.
All right. Talk to you guys later.